There is a special kind of exhaustion that does not come from working too hard. It comes from being responsible for stability and having no authority over the design that keeps producing instability. If you're a COO, a VP of operations, a director of operations, or an administrator, or the person in your organization who everyone quietly depends on to hold things together, you probably know exactly what I'm describing. You translate the visionary's pivots into something teams can act on. You absorb the contradictions between departments so the contradiction never reaches the client. You build the workaround rather than naming the gap, because naming the gap would require a conversation no one is ready to have. And you do all this without being given the authority to change the design that keeps producing the gaps in the first place. This video is about that trap, what it is, why it happens, and what changes when the architecture underneath you is actually built. Most operation leaders I work with describe their roles in the same way, even when they use different words. They say they are the bridge between every department. They say they are the person who makes sure things don't fall through the cracks. They say they are the ones who translates what the leader wants into something the team can actually execute. And they say it with a kind of quiet exhaustion, not complaint, just fact. Here's what I want to name clearly. That description is not a job. That is a symptom. A bridge between departments is what you build when departments do not have clear lanes, defined handoffs, and shared accountability structure. A person who catches what falls through the cracks is what you rely on when the system has no floor. A translator between the leader and the team is what you need when the leader's decisions are not made in a form the team can act on without interpretation. The operations leader is not doing her job wrong. She's doing a job that should not exist in its current form, compensating for structural gaps that were never designed around, using her own stamina as the substitute for architecture. That is what she's carrying, and it's heavier than anyone outside her role understands. Here's the tension at the center of most operations roles in growing organizations. The title says, you are responsible for how this organization runs. The authority says, you can manage what exists, but you cannot change the design. That gap between responsibility and authority is where most of the exhaustion lives. An operations leader who is responsible for the execution but has no authority over the definitions cannot fix the role confusion that keeps producing the same escalations. She can manage the escalations. She cannot eliminate the condition that produces it. An operations leader who is responsible for team performance but has no authority over the decision right structure cannot fix the constant upward delegation that keeps landing on the founder's desk. She can absorb the friction. She cannot redesign the system. An operations leader who is responsible for stability, but has no authority over the pace at which the visionary introduces new directions, cannot fix the whiplash that follows every strategy pivot. She can translate. She cannot slow the pivot. This is not a complaint about the visionary. The visionary is doing what visionaries do, generating direction and momentum. The problem is structural. There is no architecture between the visionary speed and the organization's capacity to absorb it. And the operations leader is living in that gap personally. Here's a reason this pattern persists in organizations for years without being corrected. The operations leader is good at what she does. She's steady under pressure. She's built for order. She finds the workaround, absorbs the contradiction, and keeps things moving. From the outside, and often from the visionary's perspective, the organization looks like it is functioning. And that is exactly the problem. When a capable person is compensating for missing structure, the missing structure becomes invisible. The founder does not fill the gap because the operations leader is filling it. The board does not see the gap because the numbers are holding. The team does not name the gap because they have learned to root around it. The only person who feels the full weight of the gap is the operations leader herself. And she often does not name it because naming it would sound like she's saying she cannot handle the job. She can handle the job. The job is just not the job it was supposed to be. The risk, if no one intervenes, is that the operations leader becomes the system instead of building one. Her own competence hides the fact that there's no architecture underneath her. And eventually, not immediately, but eventually, her stamina runs out, or she leaves, and the organization discovers all at once how much was being held together by one person's willingness to absorb what the structure should have carried. That moment, the resignation, the near resignation, the burnout, is one of the clearest signals that an organization is ready for this work. But it should not take that moment to name what was already true. I want to describe what the operations role looks like when the structural work has been done, because it is a fundamentally different job. When role definitions are clear and decision rights are mapped, the operations leader is no longer the translator between every department. She is the steward of a system that already has lanes. Her job shifts from absorbing friction to enforcing the structure that prevents friction from building up. When accountability architecture exists, the operations leader is no longer the person who has the hard conversations because no one else will. She's the person who maintains the rhythm and makes accountability a structural condition rather than a personal one. She escalates drift. She does not personally repair it every time it appears. When the visionary decision-making is channeled through a structure, a defined cadence, a clear decision rights map, a set of operating rhythms, the operations leader is no longer the human bridge between the leader's speed and the team's capacity. She's the guardrail of the architecture that absorbs the speed without transferring the weight downward. The shift is from carrying the company to guarding it. And that's not a small distinction. Carrying requires stamina. Guarding requires authority. And authority requires architecture, a real designed system that the operations leader is empowered to enforce, not just compensate for. This is what we build at Foundations, not a framework the operations leader has to hold together personally, an architecture she is empowered to protect. If you are an operations leader watching this, I want to leave you with one question. Not a diagnostic question, a permission question. What would you stop absorbing if you had the authority and the architecture to stop absorbing it? Not the things you cannot change, the things you are currently changing personally every day, because no structure exists to change them systematically. That list is not a complaint. It's a design brief. It's a description of the structural gaps that exist in your organization, named from the inside by the person who knows them best. If you want to understand what it would look like to move from carrying that list to building the architecture that makes it unnecessary, the starting point is a structural clarity conversation. It's a focused diagnostic conversation. It's not a sales call where we look at what is actually producing the reoccurring weight in your organization and what correction would require. The first conversation is free. You can request one at foundationsbc.com/FOA. The link is in the description. The goal is not to become a better bridge. The goal is to build a structure that makes the bridge unnecessary. That structure can be built.